Welcome to another exciting episode of the Andre The Beast Crayton Show. Today we're going to go into a particular topic, and I call it Imagine Your Life Like This. And it's from a book, but the topic itself is very important because every day we get up, we have to imagine what our life is going to be like. We all do that, and it starts at a young age. Today on the show, the author of this beautiful bestseller is going to explain the tools and the techniques that she went through to get to imagining her life like this. I'd like to welcome to the show from Indianapolis, Indiana, Sarah Layden. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me, Andre. It's great to be here.
Beautiful book. Imagine Your Life Like This.
Thank you.
Definitely heartfelt. A lot of your life from childhood to today is in this book. Let's start with telling the viewers a little bit about who you are first before we get into this book.
Sure, absolutely. So I've been writing for a long time, since childhood basically, and I wound up being a journalism major in college. I'm from Indianapolis, from the northeast side of town. I went to Lawrence North and St. Lawrence for grade school. And then I went to Syracuse University for college, and eventually wound up moving back here to Indianapolis.
What was it like in your household? Did you come from prime stock? You know what I mean? Did you come from a good, nurturing background family?
Yeah, I have a wonderful family, very loving family, and my parents and my sister and I relocated to Indianapolis when I was about 9 years old, so fourth grade. And I think that, that experience was part of what prompted me to become a writer. It was just being in a totally new place and environment, new class, new peers, such a bigger town as compared to where we lived previously. And being together too, through that experience. It was not traumatic by any means, but it was challenging as a kid to just have this new experience.
When did writing enter? Because you very seldom hear individuals really elaborate on when the art of writing entered their circle.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think early on, I kind of trace it back to that move into fourth grade and having a journal for the first time. One of those little leather journals with a lock on it. And I would try to hide the key from my sister. She'd always find it. But just, wanting to capture my thoughts.
Is there a difference between a journal and a diary? Because it sounds like a diary, too. Is there a difference?
Not really.
Or just what you put in it?
I think it's just what you call it.
Okay.
A diary, DIA means daily, so but I wasn't writing in it daily, so maybe that's why I call it a journal.
So when you start writing in your journal at such a young age, what were you writing? Were you just writing your experiences and maybe the landscape of the travels that you and your family encountered?
A little bit, but I think mostly, it's very much a kid's journal, a kid's diary, where I was really concerned with fairness. I was writing about, why did this happen instead of this? So I was already kind of exercising those imaginative what-if muscles,
What do you mean fairness? What were you looking at that the word fairness even came?
Oh, well, when you were 9 and 10 years old, you know what I mean, right? That person got more than I got, or, Territorial, I think, is part of it, for sure. Okay. But I would also say, beyond the journal, I was starting to write poems and starting to write short stories, and my fourth grade teacher put a poem of mine, handwritten, on the door of the classroom.
Wow.
Facing out, that was a huge deal for me, and I really liked that feeling. I think I've kind of been chasing that feeling.
You think that was the fire up under the ass that started everything?
Maybe.
Because it was validation at
Maybe,
such
yeah.
such a young age to see
Yes.
your stuff there.
Yeah, and for somebody to say, like, this is worthwhile, you should keep doing this, I think that we always are looking for those clues or those hints that what we're doing matters to
Right.
somebody else.
Your journey goes even deeper. So you get to high school.
Mm-hmm.
Does this manifest into your high school career?
The idea of writing?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So mostly in classroom settings. So I wasn't doing a lot of fiction writing at that point. Interestingly, because that's what I do mostly now. But I was writing poems. I was writing essays. But I kept it mostly to myself. I didn't share a lot of it because I was uncertain. I was like, what is this thing I'm making? It felt very private at the time. And if you want to publish your work, again, the literal definition of publish is to make public. So
Right.
if you want to put it out there in the world, like you have to start thinking about what's the thing that I'm putting out, and do other people want to read it? And you have to think about audience. But when you keep it to yourself, you don't have to think about that.
What educate the viewers on the difference between in the literary field? You're dealing with fiction, nonfiction, documentaries. How do you know which area that you want to hone your craft into, and why did you pick that particular area to hone your craft?
I think for me, it started as a reader because I loved reading fiction. I loved novels. I loved short stories, and I wanted to be able to make somebody else feel the way I felt when I was reading a book.
But doesn't the word fiction means none real?
Yeah, it does.
So you're
It does.
taking them into an imaginary world that you're
Yes.
creating.
That's right.
Okay.
Except, yes and no. You can write a world that is the realistic world that we know of.
Right.
Like with this couch, it's not or this chair is not a flying saucer, right?
Right, right,
It's not.
right.
We're not in some completely imagined world. But sometimes you take like the real thing and you imagine it in your own way, through characters, through situations, through plots, through different timelines and periods.
So why did you actually pick fiction versus the other areas of creative writing, or writing in general?
That's a good question. Because I majored in journalism and because I spent so much time thinking in terms of news and news stories, I would often also find myself wondering about, like, what if something else had happened at this school board meeting or this sporting event? Like, what if it hadn't been par for the course? What if something extraordinary had happened instead? And so just wanting to imagine other worlds and wanting to think about what it would be like if something other than what had actually happened.
And speaking of something other that happened, we during our pre-interview, you shared with me a moment of your life
Yeah.
to where you actually thought about acting.
Yes.
And what if, but opportunities open, we also talked about that. What was that like for you? Because that was
Yeah.
an opportunity long before the writing, even though writing was there, but
Sure.
you said that you wanted to dabble in the theater a little
I
bit.
did, yeah. I mentioned to Andre earlier that I had taken kind of a performing arts class.
How old were you? So they didn't know how old you were when you did this. About how old were you?
I was it was when I broke my hip and I couldn't play sports, and so
Okay.
I was probably 10 or 11, somewhere
Okay.
in there. And it was great. Like, you went to this performing arts class and you sat at a desk. You didn't have to be up on a stage, and you practiced elocution and you practiced, like, reading these different things and kind of acting them out.
Did you have any acting experience at all prior to doing this?
I don't think so. I was
Evidently, your mom or somebody thought you had something, or they wouldn't have enrolled you in.
I think that's true. I had been in, like, a nativity play. I want to say I was a pig at, like, in the manger scenes. I had the costume my mom sewed
And
for
your
me.
mom said, "Oh God, put her, send her to school now."
Yeah, get her on stage. No, I was definitely interested in it.
Okay.
And I remember being really little and watching commercials and being like, I want to do that. I want to eat cereal on TV. Like, that looks like the job for me.
Right.
So I was definitely interested in acting. And then in high school, I had tried out for the musical a couple of times and I got cut. And I was not a singer, I was not a dancer. Maybe even just, like, barely an actor, but it
How
didn't work out.
did that make you feel? Because
Oh,
when you're in, we talked about this. When you're in high school, it's almost like those formative years when you were a baby, just fast forwarded, you got to make a statement in your high school career, so to speak, because that transitions you getting ready for your college. It's kind of like if you can't master something in high school or you get rejected, it's kind of like where do I fit in?
Right.
It's the molding part of your life.
That's true. Yeah, it's absolutely. I mean, it's so formative. And rejection hurts, absolutely. And I know in that moment I was really upset. I was just like, well, what am I going to do instead? And, I think that this brings me back to a quote I think about a lot, and I'm pretty sure it's Steve Jobs who said it, that a brick wall is there to show you how badly you want something.
Yeah.
Like, it's instructive.
I like to go through the wall
instructive.
or go around it, go under it. I got to tear the wall down some kind of way.
Beast mode.
You're a school teacher. I was a school teacher.
Yeah.
Different times, but how open are kids now in the first years of college, to sit down openly and really elaborate on the struggles and the peer pressures and to try to fit in to their college, to their high school roles?
Mm-hmm.
And how much does that impact them from what you see in the college arena, even so much as being a creative writer, because because you deal with a system, and we're going to address this, quality, accessibility, and equal education. But when you're dealing with a shortage of teachers and you're dealing with a large variety, a high number of students, it's hard to really, you don't want to show favoritism, but a lot of kids won't come and share every detail that goes on in the house. Well, I'm hungry. We don't have food. Our lights were just cut off. My mother and father are alcoholics.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What are you seeing right now? How does that relate to even putting it in your book?
Well, I think this is what makes writing classes really unique, and the college level especially, is because students will tell you about those things. They won't tell you out loud necessarily.
They'll write it.
But they'll write it. Just the way that I wrote the things that were hurting me or upsetting me in a journal. They'll put it down, and it's powerful. Because, so here's something that I think about a lot too, is when you write a story down, whether you're typing it, whether you're writing by hand, whether you're dictating it into your phone, notes app, you are shaping that story. And you're thinking about, like, okay, what is this story of my life? And when you shape the story, that gives you some control over the story. And I think it's really powerful when I see students who are writing about these things you mentioned, difficult, challenging upbringings. A lot of them write their coming out stories when, they were in high school or even after, like, not being accepted by their families. Painful, powerful stuff. Hunger, alcoholism, different types of abuse. It's awful. But the trust that they have in me, like, I feel honored that they would share that with me in writing. And the fact that they're able to gain some control over the narrative by putting it down and shaping it and trying to maybe come to a sense of understanding about it.
There's a part in your book, because this book is a beautiful journey of your life, but there was also journeys in your life which is very unique here. You became a walk-on to one of the most prestigious D1 schools. How did that even take place?
Yeah, so when I was in high school, I played club volleyball, and here in Indianapolis, at the time it was called Circle City, and I was recruited through that club. I was, going to tournaments and things, and a couple of colleges recruited me, but I really knew I wanted to go to Syracuse. I wanted to go away. I wanted to...
what were some of the other schools that you had interest in going to?
There were several that I applied to that weren't necessarily possibilities with volleyball, but some of the recruiting schools were University of Alabama, Birmingham, Eastern Kentucky.
Okay.
And then I got a couple letters from others that, I sent the letters back and then never heard from them again. So,
right.
Just these fishing expeditions, right?
So you picked Syracuse, but
Yeah.
why Syracuse?
I'm pretty sure I heard about them at a college fair, and then they sent me brochures, and it looked wonderful. And I also knew that they had some really great writing programs. And at that point in high school, I knew I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't know what kind. I was still kind of exploring. I hadn't yet worked up the courage to say, no, I want to write fiction, because let's face it, is it the most practical thing you can do in life, is write a book of short stories that are all made up?
Right.
Not necessarily, but is it like soul fulfilling? Yeah, it's absolutely that, even if it might not be a practical thing.
When you get to Syracuse, volleyball is an obstacle, your first obstacle, because we already know you know how to write. At least we think we know how to write. But you still got to prove your worth, because you just got offered to come on and try to get on the team as a walk-on. Yes. How does that impact you moving forward with becoming a great writer?
Oh, gosh. I don't know that I've connected those dots yet, Andre, but I will say that being a walk-on, it was really challenging. Really challenging.
It's definitely harder than getting a scholarship. You get a scholarship is a whole different ballgame.
Right, exactly.
You got a little bit more comfortability.
Yes. Yeah.
You got to put in the work. Don't get me wrong.
Absolutely.
I was a scholarship athlete. I know you still got to put in the work. Yes. But a walk-on where you don't have anything, but a hope,
less secure. But nothing but hope. That's right. Yeah, it's not a very secure position to be in. But it's funny. I felt really driven. I walked on for my first 2 years, and then I got a partial scholarship for my last 2 years. Mm-hmm. And there were many points in time when I was like, what am I doing this for? I'm giving up a lot of other things to be at practice, to travel on the weekends, to, always be a part of this team. And what am I giving that up for? There's not a career, for me anyway, there was not a career in volleyball after college. So, but I knew, something in me knew that I would regret it if I quit.
Okay.
I felt like I had to see it through, like I needed to do the whole 4 years.
Okay.
And complete it.
How did that impact your book? Because, like I said earlier, coaches, let's get real. Let's put it out there the way it is. Coaches is about numbers, and wins create revenue, no matter how big or how small.
Yeah.
They can really give a care less about you wanting to be a book writer, because their check depends on wins.
Right.
You want to be a writer. When did you decide to basically flip the script? You're coming to the realization, it's becoming clear that you're not going to be a professional volleyball player.
Right.
When do you really start devoting more time towards being a writer?
I remember this distinctly because it was the fall of my senior year, and volleyball had just ended, and I had free afternoons for the first time, and I was like not sweaty all day for the first time.
Right.
Like it's nice. It's nice to go do what you want and to kind of be more in charge of your schedule. But I got this idea in my head. I'm like, all right, I am finally going to take a fiction workshop, because they held them in the afternoons, and I could never take it because of practice, or, my other classes for my major conflicted, whatever the case was. So because it was my last semester of college, spring semester, that I was registering for, I had to go get permission from the instructor. Mm-hmm. And the professor, I went and knocked on his door, and the professor said, okay, so tell me why you haven't taken any classes yet in creative writing. And I said, I explained what I just said to you, my schedule, volleyball, etc. And he said, okay, well, why don't you show me some of your stories? Let's see your work. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have any stories. I only had journalism pieces. I had no fiction writing experience other than the starts of things. Mm-hmm. So I didn't have anything to show him. And he basically said, I don't think you're very serious. I'm sorry, I don't have space for you in this class.
Wow.
So
didn't you know at any point of this career pathway that your writing skills was missing the body envelopment of the creative side of this?
Yeah.
Because I think you're able to write, but none of this ever registered that you got the recipe, but you need the meat and potatoes.
It didn't. I think because it was so disconnected in my brain, like the books that I would read and then how those books were made. Like I had no idea how much time and work went into writing a book.
Right.
It takes years to just write the book and then to revise it and to eventually get it out in the world, and even once it's accepted, it might be a year or two before it's out on a shelf.
Right.
So like I had no idea of, you know, all of that and what that would take. So like, yeah, absolutely I needed the meat and potatoes, but in my world, I didn't even know those were options that I could put on my tray. Like I just, I was ill-informed, I guess, about
Right.
what I needed. And so that's why I wound up going to graduate school and applying for a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing, which you don't need an MFA to be a writer, but I knew I wanted to teach too.
Right.
And so you do need a master's.
Did
to teach
anybody
college.
eventually ever look at your book and say, "Okay, this is great"? How did the individuals, how did they home in on your craft? You got the ability, but how did they? And what were you missing in that embodiment of writing the book that they saw? Because I'm pretty sure you was kind of like, "Wow, I got this thing," but when it's being dissected for the right ingredients, how much of the ingredients were you actually missing?
That's a good question. I mean, so I think that when you think about like shifting goalposts, you know, that expression, right? Like that at one point you think that the goalposts are here and then no, they're like 100 yards further. I think that sometimes happens with a project. Like this book is short stories. And so some of the stories I started writing in graduate school, some of them I've written more recently. And before it became a book, before it was even a book, it was an individual story that I would send out to a magazine and try to get them to publish it.
Right.
And then I get a little more like, oh, okay, there's some feedback and some
What was some of the feedback that
You know-
I'm gonna tell you, this is how I want to put it.
Sure.
What was the feedbacks that you was getting, and were they was the feedback a validation of what somebody just told you, but you was trying to maybe get around not doing what they told you to do in order to make the book an enjoyable read?
Oh gosh. No, I don't think there was ever a point where I was like, I'm not gonna listen to you. Although here's So here's the thing. Although I think that with my novel, I have a novel called Trip Through Your Wires that came out in 2015. It's set partially in Indianapolis and partially in Guanajuato, Mexico. And with that novel, I worked on that in graduate school. That was my thesis.
Okay.
And then I was like, okay, I'm gonna send it out the day after graduation, essentially, and like get it published, and then find a teaching job, because if you want to teach creative writing, you have to publish books. You have to publish your creative work. Well, guess what? It didn't work out that way. I still had a few
That's
more
another
drafts
wall.
to
So
go.
how do we go around that wall?
How do we go around that wall?
Through it.
I think that with that novel in particular, I just needed more time to think about it and to set it aside so I could see it with fresh eyes again. So some of the feedback that I got in my program, in my graduate school program, was good feedback, but I maybe wasn't at a place where I could implement it yet. Like my skills were not there yet. I just needed more time to write and revise in order to take that feedback and get the book to where it needed to be in order to publish it. And the same thing is true of Imagine Your Life Like This, like getting those stories together. Because this book has had different titles. I sent it out with different stories in it. Like it's had a lot of different shapes and forms. And the form that happened to get accepted.
Who gave you the best advice in finishing the project? Because it's kind of like what we talked about when I was developing the iambeast studio. I had so many people that were sharing with me information, but the thing about it, when the podcast industry took off during COVID, nobody had a blueprint.
Yeah.
Everybody was guessing.
Yeah.
But then finally, I was able to orchestrate the right sources. What we talked about,
Yes.
the right sources were there, the right accessibility to information was there.
Right.
Who gave you when did the right information come for you to finally complete the book? Because you get it from everywhere.
That's right. That's a great question too, because I think it's a combination of the right person giving you the right advice, and you, timing wise, it intersects with you being open to hearing it, or you being able to
Comprehend it.
put it into practice. Yeah. So there were two pieces I can think of with this particular book, and I had sent it to a bunch of different presses, and one of them was University of Wisconsin Press, which eventually published it. But university presses, they go through a really strenuous process of peer review. And part of this is they want other experts in the field, creative writers, to read it and say, yes, you should publish this, or no, send it back for revisions, that sort of thing. And so some of the feedback I got early on, I got some revision feedback, and some of it I agreed with, some of it I was like, oh, I'm not sure about that.
What did you agree with? Because when you're working and you're creative, let's get real. Nobody wants to hear, if you put a lot of work into making a project,
right,
you really don't want to hear it. You have to hear it,
right,
but you don't want to hear it.
Right. I think I'm trying to think of specifics, and I'm blanking on examples. But I remember that one of the reviewers had the suggestion, like, you should pull a couple of these stories out because they don't fit thematically, and you should replace them with other stories. And I think I was kind of scared because I was like, I don't have other stories. I don't have other stories to replace them with, but I had to write them, you know. So 2 pieces of advice that I got. One was from one of my greatest friends, Barney Haney. He's a writer, a fiction writer, and he has an amazing novel that's going to get out in the world one of these days. And Barney, I was sort of complaining to him, it's good to have some people in your circle that you can complain to that will listen when you complain. Yeah, 100%.
And not say nothing back to you as you're complaining.
Well, yes and no.
Until you're all done.
Until you're done, right.
Yeah.
And so, like, I had texted Barney and I said, listen, I got this feedback, and he listened, and then he texted me back, and he was like, you know how to revise, you know how to do this, you just need to, like, go out there and get your book. Like, they're going to publish it if you consider this advice. And then the second piece, so you need a kick in the pants, right? You need somebody to let you sulk for 5 minutes, and then to say, just go do it, right? And then the second piece of advice was from the editor of this press, and he said, take that feedback into consideration, but ultimately it's your book, and you get to decide what you want your book to be. So, you know.
I think the last advice
Yeah.
is definitely the best advice, because just like I tell people to come on the show, only you can tell your story.
Yes.
And everybody may not understand your story.
Right.
All you ask them to do is listen.
Right.
To it.
Right.
Plain and simple.
Exactly. But here's the thing, like, some publishers, they don't tell you it's your book, you can do what you want with it. They do dictate what the book should be. So, I mean, that's a publishing question, right?
Do you think
what do you want to make?
Do you think the book would, do you think you would have been satisfied with writing a book if somebody said, like you said, you got more feedback for taking out, and these are your stories. Let's get real. There's nobody's stories but yours, whether they're fiction, non-fiction, they're your stories.
Right.
I should be, as a consumer, should be able to pick up this book, sit back without judgment, and just read it.
Yeah.
With none. But now you got publishers that are telling you, well, take this out, add this, do this. As a creative writer, how do you think that would have really affected your creativity in writing books and moving forward writing books?
I mean, I think you have to weigh what's important to you, and you have to weigh what you want and what you want to make, right? Because frequently people will ask about self-publishing, like, why not just self-publish? And certainly that's an option, and I don't know a lot about it, so I can't speak too much about it.
Right.
But it wasn't the option I wanted. It didn't fulfill the goals I had to get a book out in the world that could be distributed more widely, because self-published books are harder to distribute. They're just there, right? You have to do a ton of marketing, whereas a publisher will market for you. So, you know, to your question, I think that having the editor back me up and say, ultimately it's your book, and you decide what it becomes, was very freeing. Because it is easy to look at feedback, especially when it's harsh or critical, and say, to get defensive, or to feel like this is very personal.
Or quit.
Or to quit. And I frequently tell my students, you know, this isn't personal. We're not, we're never attacking you when we're writing critiques of peer work or anything like that. What we're trying to do is help you see it, because it's too close to you. You can't see it clearly until You can't see it as clearly, I should say, until you give it to somebody else to read, and they can give you feedback with fresh eyes.
What were at least two of the things that they were more concerned about you tweaking, that it needed more meat and potatoes? That when you sat back and looked, you go, you know what, they were probably right on this. I needed to add this in order to get this. I needed to maybe improve the timeline. I needed to make more of an impact on how the term, how the phrase, and he threw a right through the window, and then you left it blank. You know what I mean?
Right. I mean, I think probably the most valid thing that was helpful was some of the stuff that didn't fit. Because even though it's individual short stories and they're not all linked together, it's not like a novel, which is one long continuous story. It's like all these separate stories. But some of the separate stories were a little more experimental.
Okay.
And the rest of the stories that made it in, they're all like straight up stories. And they're realism. There's no magical realism. I had thrown in a couple of magical ones.
What do you expect the viewers to get out of this book?
Well, I hope that they would be entertained. I hope that it would also cause them to think about their lives and to think about the ways that they imagine their lives. And I also hope that it would be something that brings them reflection. Because a lot of these stories are about working and about people's jobs and about people being underemployed and expecting more out of their life and wondering, when am I going to have more in my life? And what if I got the thing that I really wanted? Then what?
Right.
I think those are important things for us to wrestle with and think about. And I hope that people who read it would be prompted to maybe think about some of those things too.
You're on a quest for resourceability for our students, educational equality. Why is that so important to you?
Well, you know, at IUPUI, soon to be IU Indianapolis.
We have such great things going on in this city.
I know, we have a lot of things happening. But we have a lot of first-generation students who are the first in their families to go to college, and you know, they bring with them the expectation that they're going to know how to do college, and their family kind of expects that of them. But it's their first time; they don't necessarily have people helping them. So, you know, I want to be a resource for them. I want to make sure that our campus is a resource for them, that they are able to get the things they need, whether it's academic, personal, social, emotional. You know, I think that young people today do talk a lot more about mental health, and that's a positive thing. And, you know, the challenges that they face are very real, especially as first-gen students, and I want to make sure that we're offering them the things that they need.
And not just the first-gen generation. I went back to school at the age of 30-some years old.
Did you?
And I was full-time.
Yeah.
Imagine, you know, walking back in. I was petrified. But luckily at Lorraine Community College, at the time it was a smaller college, it's now humongous now. But I really like the fact that, like you said, that is an important factor. I wanted to feel comfortable. And even at my age, I felt comfortable going back. And I can understand that. That is very important research.
So, Lorraine, Ohio?
Yeah.
Do you know who's from there?
Yeah.
Lots of people probably do.
I tell you who's from Avon, Indiana, Avon, Ohio, which is across from Avon Lake, because I lived in Avon Lake, but I went to Lorraine. Bob Barker's best friend, the guy that goes, hey, come on down. Phil. I think his name is Rick Fields.
I know exactly who you're talking about.
Yeah. He's from Avon, Ohio. So
what do you know?
Who's from Avon? Who's from Lorraine?
Lorraine, Ohio is, I believe, it's the home of Toni Morrison.
Really?
Famous, wonderful writer, Nobel Prize winner. Yeah, beautiful writer.
Small world, isn't
it? I know. So I would love for you to read the first story in the collection. It's the title story. It's Imagine Your Life Like This, and it's about a woman who goes back to college after dropping out many years before.
Really?
And the challenges she experiences as she also gets out of an abusive marriage and goes back to school for herself.
How can the viewers get not only this book, but your other books? How can they support you, get your book, and definitely a must read?
You can order Imagine Your Life Like This, or Trip Through Your Wires, or The Story I Tell Myself About Myself. All three of those works of fiction are available anywhere you buy books. Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Bookshop.org is a great website too that supports independent stores. And of course, Indianapolis, we have so many wonderful independent bookstores all over town, and if you can support them, then you are supporting literary culture in our city, which is a wonderful thing. And many of them have this book on their shelves.
What's the end game for you?
I want to be able to write the next book. I want to be able to publish the next book. I love writing stories. I love thinking about structure and thinking about the shape of a story. And I have two novels that I'm trying to get out in the world. One is a young adult novel about a high school volleyball team and LGBTQ plus issues and discrimination, and it takes place in Indianapolis. And
We're definitely have to have you come back and elaborate on that.
We should talk about it.
That's a really good topic to address. We have to come back. So what else?
Can I tell you about the other novel too?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah.
I think we talked about it in the earlier interview, but it is a story that takes place in a northern suburb of Indianapolis, and it's three women whose lives intersect at a fertility clinic where a reality TV show is being filmed.
You just got everything going on.
I'm trying.
Isn't it beautiful to live in Indianapolis, Indiana? We just got everything going on here. I love this city. I love the fact I got to meet you. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure you order this book. A definitely must read. Let's support each other. This has been another exciting episode of the Andre The Beast Crayton Show.